All right, so I'm going to give a walkthrough on how to use switch statements because that's what you're going to have to use for your guys' next programming project. So let's kind of go into the tutorials point. Remember, you guys have this as an access. So I'm in the decision-making section. So we have learned if statements, we learned if-else statements, we learned that we could do nested if statements, all of those. The only thing that we haven't really learned is switch statements. Okay. So switch statements are really useful to use. The major difference, let me open this bigger. The major difference when we're looking at switch statements is that you are testing for specifics. So you're testing an inequality against a list of values. Each value is called a case. The variable being switched on is checked for each case. Okay, so we have something that we're checking, some type of expression, and we're checking it against each one of these cases or each one of these values. If it equals exactly that value, then we can do some code. We can choose to break, or if we are having this in the method, we can choose to return from there, and then we don't have to break. The break is optional. We can have multiple cases on top of each other. So if it meets any one of those criteria, then we can execute code. And we can have a default case. So if it doesn't meet any one of those, we can have it execute code in that way. Okay. Variables used in switch statements, they can be integers, various types of integers. They can be strings, or they could be enumerations, which we're not going to be covering. Okay, so integers, easy to use. Strings, easy to use. I will show you a couple examples of that in a walkthrough. You can have as many cases as you want within a switch. Each case is going to be followed by a value, and then you have to finish off that case with a colon, not a semicolon. Okay. The value that you're putting in for the case, it has to be of the same data type. So if your expression is a string, then each value needs to be a string. If your expression is an integer, each case has to be an integer value. Okay. When a break statement is reached, the switch terminates and the flow of control goes back to the line following the switch statement. So you don't need to have a break in each one. That's only when you want it to jump out. So you can have where it's falling through subsequent cases until a break is reached. And then you can have your default case. So an example of this is we have our switch, which is taking that expression and it's going to test it against all of these cases. If one of the cases is true, it's going to execute that code block. If it has not reached a break, it's going to execute all the code blocks underneath it until it reaches a break. Or it gets pulled out, so if you were returning something. So here's an example. They just did a simple class where they're taking grades. So here is using a character. Okay, notice that it is in a single quote. Okay, that is needed for characters. For strings, it's double quotes. You have to have double quotes. So if we give a grade, this is the expression that we're going to check. If we put that in as a switch, then we're checking the grade, which is C, saying does C equal A? Does C equal B? Does C equal C? Yes, it does. All right, we'll print out well done, and then I want you to break out of this. Okay, if in this case the grade was B, then B, because there's no break statement, it's going to go down to the next one, and then it's going to print out this, and then it hits the break, so then it'll kick out. And I'll say your grade is, and we'll print that grade. Okay? So it's fairly simple. Let's go through some stuff. So here's a demo of it. Let me go ahead and run it just so we can see. A couple of things that we're going to do in this program that you have to do in your other program. You're going to end up having to, for your day calculator, you're going to have to have separate methods and things like that. So I have a loop going, and I'm going to delete all this. I'm just demoing it. So I have a loop going. So if I say I am, let's say 9, it's going to print out something. You are too young. Please try again when you're older. And then it's looping back so I can reprint. And it's giving me different phrases depending on my age. 17, 18. Okay. 21. Okay. So we get in. Who would you like to vote for? And I could put A, B, C, or D, or type in a candidate. Let's type in A. And I'll even do it as lowercase so we can see it. I voted for candidate 1. Thanks for using the system, and then I'm done. Okay. So pretty straightforward, but I have a number of methods running. We're going to go ahead and we're going to check those. So let's go ahead and delete all of this. I'm going to walk you through the code so that you can be successful creating on your other stuff. So I want you to understand what switches are. Okay, so a switch, let's just say I have int number equals 5. Okay, and if I have a switch, I need to test for an expression. That expression could be that number. That means that I'm using an int in my switch. Then all my cases have to be int numbers. I can't do A. This won't make sense, and it will give me an error. It says incompatible types. It requires an int if found a string. Okay. If I do it as single, let's do A. Switch label case A is unreachable. This is going to give me the same issue. It will freak out. But if I say, let's say 1, how about we make a switch where it's just going to test odds and even numbers. 1, 3, case 5, case. Notice I'm finishing them with colons, not semicolons. 9. So let's say I'm making a bunch of statements that system.out.println, you have typed an odd number. Okay, and then I want it not to continue, so I'm going to say break if it's one of those is true. If they didn't type one of those, then I could do the default and say that that was an even number, system.out.println, you have typed an even number. Okay, so if I ran this, let's go ahead and see what it does. I've typed an odd number, 5. Okay, if I change this, because we haven't implemented a scanner class yet, you've typed an even number. Okay, now this is only looking for 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. If I put 12, actually, let me do 13, just so you can see where there are some issues with switches if you're not paying attention, because it's looking for exact. That's why you can't use decimals in this. It says I've typed an even number. I most definitely have not typed an even number. 13 is not an even number. Okay, but because I don't have a case that matches that number, 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9 do not match 13. That means that I come to my default case, and this is what gets printed. Okay? If I don't have this at all, because this is optional, I can choose not to have a default. It just won't execute this line right here. So I see nothing at the end. So I could have another system.out.println, you have reached the end of the program. All right, so let's go ahead and run it just so you guys can see. I've reached the end of the program. There was no issues in my code, but because I did not meet any of the cases inside a switch, the code did not execute. I can have a break in between every single one of them, which in some of the switches on the next project, you're going to have to do that. Okay, so this whole thing right here is basically testing odd, even numbers. So this should probably be extracted as a method. Okay, so we can, let's say I'm going to delete that. Let's go ahead and implement a scanner. So scanner keyboard equals new scanner, and we got to type system.in. Okay, all right, so I have a scanner. Now I want a loop so that I don't have to keep running my program if I'm trying to test something. So let's say I just have a Boolean and I call it loop, and I'm going to start it off as true. Okay, so then I can do while loop. While that is true, I can execute everything inside these brackets. Okay, if I want it to stop, then I could just change the loop to false and it will break out of it. So this is kind of like my game loop that I have when I want to start playing a game, and I could ask stuff. So let's start creating a method that we want to find out what their age is. Okay, so I have a scanner in here. It's recognized in the main, but I want to make it so I'm not repeating myself. So I'm going to create a method, public static, and I want it to return, let's say we want it to return, let's say a Boolean. Okay, because we can have it return anything. And I'm going to do age verification. And in terms of requirements of what I want for this, ultimately I want them to be able to enter their age, and if they're lower than a certain age, I'm not going to let them into the program. If they are of a certain age, then that's my verification and I can let them in. So I know that they're going to have to type an age in here, so I could go ahead and pass my scanner in there. So I could say I need a scanner, and then I just got to give it a variable name. I could give it the exact same name here as keyboard. I'm going to do typewriter just so you can see that it doesn't matter. Okay, so we could start off here with how old are you? And then I am going to take what they type. So I could either do, int age equals typewriter dot next int. Okay, this is one way to do it. And then I can do switch, and I put that expression in there that I want to check. So I have my cases. Case 0, case 1, case 2, case 3, case 4, case 5. If you had a lot of numbers to check, this would not be a good system to use for making decision making. An if statement testing if something was greater than or less than would be much more useful. 13, case 14. So let's say if we are doing a voting one, you need to be 18 to vote. 16, case 17, case 18. And let's do default. So if they enter 0, 1, 2, anything, as long as we don't have a break, it's going to continue running down. So I could say, hey, if they are entering 0 through 9, I could print out, you are way too young, go find your parents. Okay. And I could break out of it, so it's not going to continue print. If they're entering 10 through, let's say 15, system.out.println, you are not old enough to vote. And I could break out of that. System.out.println, you have to wait 2 more years. Okay. Now I'm leaving the break off of 16 and so that you can see what's going to happen if 16 gets entered. All right, so if they're 18 or they didn't enter one of those numbers, then we can have where we want them to be able to get in. So I could say I want to return true. Okay, so in this one I'm breaking out of these, and I could return false if they did not give me 18 or anything greater than that. Now the default right now, default would include if they entered negative numbers as well, so we would have to have some way that we could check against that. But the only time that we're going to be returning true is if they're entering 18 or default. So if they enter 17 on down, then we're returning false, but we're giving some type of printouts for that. So that is a method that we created, age verification. Inside of this loop, we're going to need to print this. So I could do, since age verification is going to return a Boolean value, I could use that as my conditional for doing other things. So this is going to return true or false. I can say that I don't want another part of my program to run unless it's true. So age verification, I'm going to have it return true, like what I did. Here it's requiring that I have to pass something in. So in here I'm going to pass in my keyboard, which is a scanner. And that's what that requires. It requires a scanner, and it's going to give it the name of typewriter. Okay, so if the age verification is true, then I could execute, say, another method for voting. So let's just, so we can see it run real quick. You have entered the restricted area. And then I can make it so I don't need it to loop anymore. Loop equals the opposite of whatever the loop was. And that would kick me out so that I would reach the end of my program. So let's go ahead and run this real quick. Okay, so I jumped into the loop. I'm in my age verification. That's this method. It's asking me how old I am. So if I put 12, okay, that's going to print you are not old enough to vote. So I hit enter. You are not old enough to vote. And then it's looping back because I cannot execute this. I'm reaching this end of my while loop. I'm looping back since loop is still true. And now I'm back at my if, checking if age verification is going to return true or false. So if I type 5, this code piece is going to execute for any one of these because there's not a break before it. So if I enter 5, you're way too young, go find your parents. If I enter, now here is the thing, if I enter 15, says you're not old enough to vote. If I enter 16, I'm going to get 2 phrases. You have to wait 2 more years. You only have to wait 1 more year. Okay, see that? Because I don't have a break statement for this 16. So it's going to, since 16 was true, it executed this code, but because there's not a break, it's still going on down the line until it hits a break statement. So it's executing what it sees for 17. If I enter just 17, then I get this case is true, so it's executing this code line and then it's hitting the break. Okay? And because I have not entered a valid number, so if I entered 19, I've entered that restricted area that's inside that if conditional, and then I reach the end of the program, and then it closes. Now, if I enter -10, that's still hitting that default. Okay, so there would maybe be a way that I'd want to guard against that. Again, switch statements are not used for everything. This is just an extreme example so that you guys can see. Age verification would probably work better with some if and else if statements than it would for anything else. But okay, so we have that. So assuming that they entered that value, which I don't need to have it as the conditional here. I could have what they typed in to be checked first. So if that age, I could do a quick check. If age is less than 0, system.out.println, you need to enter a valid age, and then I want to kick them out of the program. So that means I'm going to return false automatically. I don't want to go to the switch statement. So if I return false here, I'm not checking any more of this code. Okay, so now if I ran this, my age verification would work. So let's go ahead and try to put -10 again. -10, you need to enter a valid age. Okay, so it gets me here, returns false, which means that this is false. So I'm coming to the end of this code block. There's nothing after it. I'm at the end of the while loop. Is loop still true? It has not changed, so I'm starting back at the top and I'm going back to my age verification, which is just taking the scanner that I already have, checking how old. So as long as I have a number that is greater than 0 or greater than or equal to 0, then I should be able to get inside the switch. So now default is only covering 19 and above. So if I enter 1,000, I'm apparently old enough. Okay, so that is the switch statement. Now let's go ahead and create another one. So let's say that it is voting. So public static. Let's say we want to return a string and vote. That's the method we're going to call it. We would need a, let's say, a scanner. Call it a typewriter. And we can ask them system.out.println. So let's say enter the, what is the candidate that you want to vote for? Okay. So let's give them a couple options. A for candidate 1. I'm going to copy these. Okay, so we got candidate 1, 2, 3, and 4. So B, D, C. 4, candidate 3, candidate 2. Okay, and maybe we want to give them an additional one to enter the name. or enter the name of the candidate. Okay. All right, so we give them an option of what they want to do. Let's put a couple spaces afterwards. So we're going to take their candidate. They're going to give a choice. So I'm going to store it as a string. So we need our typewriter dot next line. And then we can do our switch. So switch, based off the choice, I want to give a number of options. So case A, case B. Now notice I'm putting them in double quotes. That's because it's a string. C, case D, and case, if they didn't enter one of those, I'm going to have default. And maybe the default is just returning what they typed. So I'm returning a string. So I could put a break in all of these, or I could say that I'm wanting to return, this method is going to return a string. So if they type A, then I'm going to return candidate 1. Okay. Return, and we could probably simplify this up a little bit more. Return candidate 3, return candidate 4. Okay. Or the default, which would be return whatever they typed in as their choice. So if it doesn't match A, B, C, or D, then we want it to return what they typed. So if they typed Barney, we want it to return Barney. Okay, so that is returning a string. Again, we're not using it yet because it hasn't been typed in. So here, where we've entered the restricted area, let's go ahead and type that. So I'm going to use that method. Let's use a string. String choice is equal to vote, and I have to pass in the scanner, so I'm going to pass in the keyboard. Okay, and then we can print out system.out.println. You have picked, and then choice. As your option. Okay, so we've already seen that age verification, we've tested it, made sure that it got us in there. Now we have this other method for voting, and we have to pick so that it's going to tell us what candidate. Now there's going to be an error that a lot of you guys are getting, and I'll show you what the deal is. Okay, so let's do 21. Okay, so I've got it in that restricted area. What is the candidate that you want to vote for? A for candidate 1, B, C, D, or enter the name of the candidate. You have picked blank as your option. You've reached the end of the program. So it just skipped. It didn't even give me the choice. Okay, the reason is because when you are doing stuff like this, next line, when you're going from integers to strings, integers do not automatically go to another line. So if you want to fix that, you have to have the scanner go to the next line first. Okay, so that means that I'm just going to type typewriter.nextLine. That's going to get me to the next line, because this next line, it's not going to the next line and then reading it. It's reading that line that it's on and then going to the next line. So now if I run this, '21, okay, now it wants me to enter. So if I type A, look, I'm going to type lowercase a. You've picked A as your option. Okay, you've reached the end of your program. Okay, it returned as a default because it did not match A, B, C, or D, okay? A way that you can help control your input, because uppercase is different than lowercase, is when I'm looking for stuff for my next line, I can hit dot, and I could choose to have everything go to uppercase or everything to go to lowercase that they type. So A will automatically be a capital A. So let's go ahead and run that. So even if they weren't typing in caps, then we could deal with it. So I type lowercase a, then it says you have picked candidate 1 as your option, okay? Because it took what I typed and put it automatically to uppercase. Okay, if I ran this again and I type Wilbur, it put it all as caps. I picked Wilbur as my option, okay? So this is another way that we can use switches. Notice that I broke them up into methods. So my main is very, very simple, okay? It's really just helping to control flow to and from my methods, okay? This is very key in using switches and using methods and using loops when you guys are doing your switch project, okay? This one you guys could copy verbatim, does not matter to me. I'm not collecting this one, I'm collecting the other one. This is just to help you walk through how to do switches, what they do, how they interact. They're really very easy to use. There are a couple pros and cons to it, which you guys have seen. If you're not dealing with stuff with the break statements or you're not paying attention to the input, it will give you unexpected results. Okay? All right. Good luck. Have fun.